Nothing quite like about a minute's worth of silence. Perhaps I should set things up before I start streaming. Ah, well. Just glad I never tried to pretend I'm a professional. Right. I think I have all of it. If we're lucky. Otherwise, we'll find out. As far as I remember, all I need the last bits of the pyramids. I should probably remember to install some music as well, for the intro and the outro.
Welcome to The Riddles of the Sphinx. A sphinx was originally meant to be a personification of the king. The human head, wearing pharaonic regalia, was fused with the body of a lion, thus sharing the qualities the powerful animal possessed, namely its power, the swiftness of its attack, and its majestic authority. By these very virtues, it was also considered a symbol of protection. Unsurprisingly, statues of sphinxes could be found along the dromas, protectors of the path taken by the gods to reach the temples. Over the centuries, enthusiasts and historians alike have wondered, who built the Sphinx? For what purpose? And who does it represent? These questions remain unanswered. Several theories do exist, however, some more credible than others. One theory supposes that Jedefre chose to pay homage to his father Khufu by building the Great Sphinx of Giza. The stone temple on the eastern face of the Sphinx would have been added later on by his brother and successor, Khafre, in order to strengthen the divine worship of their father. It would be the first Egyptian temple oriented with the sun. Another theory suggests that the Sphinx was built by Khafre and was meant to represent him. The arguments to support this hypothesis are based on the fact that the limestone beds used for the main work of the Temple of the Sphinx are geographically and architecturally similar to the Valley Temple of Khafre. Some believe that Khufu himself built the Sphinx, which was later finished under his successors, Jedefre and Khafre. These arguments are based on the stylistics of the engraving, the typology of the nemes, and the absence of a beard at the time of construction. While ancient Egypt as a whole leaves a rather monochrome vision of its monuments and statuary, it is vital to understand that in ancient times, absolutely everything was painted. The sun, eating away at the pigments of the colors, the sand, the climate, and the implacable impact of time, unfortunately destroyed the glorious colors of the Sphinx of Giza. Documents from an Arab Egyptologist of the 12th century, Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi, indicate that traces of red were still visible in his time. Today, however, the only color that remains are traces of red close to the ears of the Sphinx, as well as hints of blue and yellow on the nemes, traditional colors for that type of headdress. The pigments for the color red were man-made, obtained by mixing different products such as clay, quartz sand, and very finely crushed hematite. Red had a strong symbolism in ancient Egypt. It was both the color of life and the color of death. It could represent the sands of the desert or the brilliance of the sun. Red was also associated with the god Seth, vengeful and destructive. The Egyptian word for red, deshur, is also the word which was used to signify the desert, or the royal crown of Lower Egypt. In art, red was also the color used to paint the bodies of men, while yellow was used for women. It is possible that there were also color restoration efforts during the Saite period about 600 years before Cleopatra's rule, as indicated by notes on the inventory stele, discovered in 1858 by Auguste Mariette. It is because of this that the team made the decision to display it with its full range of colors, even though the Sphinx's colors would have likely faded by Cleopatra's time. Dating from the 4th dynasty, approximately 2600 to 2500 BCE, the Great Sphinx of Giza is the oldest and largest sphinx that we know of. Carved from a natural limestone outcrop, the Sphinx measures 19.8 meters in height, 73.2 meters in length, and 14 meters in width. In order to bring polish to the imposing monument, several blocks of limestone were added after the initial construction phase. Since then, there have been numerous attempts at preservation. The polish present in the game integrates some aspects of modern restoration attempts. The team made this choice to present a more iconic version of the Sphinx of Giza to the player. Today, the Sphinx is called the Terrifying One. This appellation is translated from its Arabic name, Abu al-Hal, which in turn was derived from Baluba in Coptic. The Sphinx as a whole was carved in situ from a natural stone promontory. Its head was built in a limestone peak of the Mukattam Plate, and the body was sculpted in the underlying rock layer where it is located. The degradation of the Sphinx is due in particular to wind erosion and the different quality of limestone used in its construction. The level of sodium contained in the groundwater which abuts the stone is also a contributing factor. The natural bedrock is seen through the oblique natural strata of the Sphinx's body that are similar to the surrounding limestone. Since antiquity, people have always believed there was a hidden tomb deep within the Sphinx. It is thought that attempts to plunder the Sphinx began as far back as the First Intermediate period. Since then, numerous attempts to pierce the Sphinx's secrets have been carried out, leaving indelible scars upon the monument. 12 meters long and cut during pharaonic times, another entrance in the back of the Sphinx aroused curiosity. Although Thutmose IV attempted to seal it off, it was possibly reopened by treasure hunters. It was rediscovered by Howard Vyse and mapped more recently by Mark Lehner. This entrance at the back of the Sphinx leads to different cavities of a few meters each, in directions going inside the statue's body and under the surface. The team has used this opportunity to extrapolate a little more. While there have been no major discoveries pertaining to the Sphinx of Giza in recent years, theories and hypotheses continue to emerge. Without validation provided by archaeological sources, however, they remain unsubstantiated. The first of the main theories as to the Sphinx of Giza's meaning posits that the Sphinx was originally a massive representation of the god Anubis. Its principal arguments are that the head of the Sphinx is disproportionate compared to the size of its body. The second theory believes that the representation of two sphinxes on the stela of Thutmose IV would indicate that another stone sphinx had existed on the site itself, possibly even in paired symmetry on the other side of the Nile. However, neither of these theories can be verified in any way. Several scientific projects using new technologies have been put in place in the past decades. The most important was led by Mark Lehner and his team, who specialize in the study and survey of the Giza Plateau, including the Sphinx site. The mapping made it possible to see the materials used to construct the Sphinx, analyze the different layers of erosion, and figure out the most fragile areas to protect. After a few attempts at giving the Sphinx artistic proportions, the team instead decided to use photogrammetry mapping to faithfully reproduce the proportions of the Sphinx. What the Sphinx of Giza represented during its construction and how the Sphinx was perceived by the Egyptians of the New Kingdom are two very different matters. Originally a representation of the king imbued with the power of the lion, the Sphinx was eventually viewed as a direct representation of the Most Divine. It is theorized that kings of the New Kingdom believed that the Sphinx of Giza was the one who recognized and legitimized the ruler of Egypt. Thus, despite the fact the Sphinx of Giza was partially buried under the sand during his reign, Amenhotep II knew that the monument was of great importance. Amenhotep II built a second temple dedicated for the Sphinx as Horemakhet to pay homage to Khufu and Khafre, his predecessors. It became a common habit for this dynasty to spend time with their royal courts at the Sphinx. Its sanctuary became known as Setepet, the Chosen. Egyptologist Mark Lehner believed that Amenhotep II built a statue of himself anchored between the paws of the Sphinx, likely to legitimize his reign, alongside a stela found by Salim Hassan. Many other pharaohs of this dynasty, such as Tutankhamun and Ramses II, also left marks of their passage in a similar fashion, sometimes even stripping the stones of nearby temples and pyramids to do so. Amenhotep II's son and successor, Thutmose IV, was a frequent offender.
Indeed.
While sleeping between the Sphinx's paws, the future Thutmose IV saw in a dream the god Horemakhet proclaiming his coming accession on the throne of the two lands. This was, of course, on the condition that he remove all of the sand covering the Sphinx, which stood guard as the personification of the god, and should thus never be engulfed by the sands of the desert. The 15-ton dream stela built by Thutmose IV to commemorate his dream was discovered by an Italian Egyptologist, Giovanni Battista Caviglia, in 1818, when he undertook the task of freeing the Sphinx from the sand, which had, yet again, covered it. Caviglia was looking for an entrance into the structure of the Sphinx, but instead he discovered an open-air chapel and stelas between the paws. Ashes from a ceremony were still present. Protected by sand, they quite possibly were from the last ceremonies in Roman times. That same year, Caviglia discovered fragments of the Sphinx's beard that had probably been added during the New Kingdom. If many of these pieces are held by museums in Cairo, a fragment is displayed at the British Museum, along with a piece of the uraeus that was on the Sphinx's headdress. It is believed this fragment of beard was possibly kept in place thanks to the statue of Amenhotep II, which was supposed to be located under the head of the Sphinx. A popular cultural legend purports that the nose of the Sphinx of Giza was lost during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte to the cannon fire of French soldiers in training. However, engravings from before the time of that campaign already depicted the Sphinx without a nose, indicating that it had been removed before the French campaign. The most plausible hypothesis is based on the research of the German historian Ulrich Harman. During the 1980s, Harman compiled medieval sources written by Arab authors. In doing so, he discovered that the Sphinx was once perceived as a favorable omen, a deity supporting sediment-nurturing floods and crops. Around 1378, a Sufi by the name of Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar could not stand this vision of the monument, and in an iconoclastic act, broke the nose of the Sphinx. According to the texts, he was then hanged and burned between the legs of the Sphinx for his crime.
Of course, according to one of the older Asterix comics, it was Obelix who climbed the Sphinx and then stepped a bit too hard on its nose, and then it broke off.
Welcome to Khufu's funerary complex. The Valley Temple was the first architectural component encountered when one entered the funerary complex. It was considered the official entrance of the tomb and mixed the structural components of both a temple and a portico. Khufu's Valley Temple shows evidence of a basalt pavement, letting us know where the portico portion of the structure was located. Such a partition is believed to symbolize both the subterranean and solar aspects of the afterlife. Khufu's causeway ran from the floodplain up to the plateau, linking together the Valley Temple and the Mortuary Temple. A traditional causeway presented itself as a paved path, enclosed by walls and often roofed. Fragments discovered by archaeologists indicate that the walls in Khufu's causeway, one of the longest known to us, were decorated with carvings and possibly paint. Depictions show a great variety of themes: stars on the ceiling, accompanied by scenes of battles on the walls. Other engravings depicted the creation of the complex by illustrating craftsmen at work. The most impressive private cemeteries of Giza are located east and west of Khufu's pyramid. The eastern cemetery was reserved for members of the royal family, while the western cemetery was mostly set aside for various court dignitaries. In both areas, private tombs, also known as mastabas, were aligned and laid out methodically in streets and avenues. This arrangement was probably an attempt at recreating the king's court for the afterlife. To the east of Khufu's pyramid reside three smaller constructions, the three Queen's Pyramids. A sloping passage led from the ground surface to a burial chamber, cut out of the bedrock and lined with masonry. If it seems quite certain that these monuments were intended for Queen's burials, the identity of the original occupants is hard to assess. The northernmost pyramid was most likely meant for Queen Hetepheres, who was believed to have been Khufu's mother. However, in 1925, her actual tomb was discovered nearby by accident. It was hidden at the bottom of a deep masonry pit in an underground chamber. Within the concealed chamber, Egyptologists discovered the most complete royal funerary equipment, dating from the Old Kingdom, though her body was missing.
If she wandered off.
Within the vicinity of Khufu's pyramid, Egyptologists have uncovered 7 boat pits. The exact function of such boat-shaped pits remains unconfirmed, though one can easily conjecture that it was symbolic in nature. The boat pits being located at the eastern side of the pyramid, at the precise spot where the resuscitated king was supposed to reappear, could constitute evidence to support such an assumption. The 2 southern boat pits, each covered by a roof of huge limestone slabs, were discovered in 1954 by Kamal al-Malak, an Egyptian Egyptologist. Only one of them had been opened. 1,224 boat parts made of cedar wood were retrieved one by one and patiently reassembled by the master restorer Ahmed Youssef. This process took 28 years. Youssef worked by following lines of mortise and tenon joints and by stitching parts together with vegetable ropes, all in order to keep the design as authentic as possible.
Hey. Have the patience for that. for the funds.
The Greek term pyramidion refers to the capstone of a pyramid or the tip of an obelisk. In ancient Egyptian, both components were called benben. This word was also used for a specific kind of food, a cone-shaped offering made of bread. The pyramidion was intended to be a miniature reproduction of the pyramid, making it equal to the monument itself in symbolic importance. A few pyramidia have been retrieved from pyramidal complexes. The earliest, found in Dashur, is undoubtedly a good example of Old Kingdom's pyramidia. It is made of limestone and has no inscriptions. Some engraved pyramidia were recovered from private funerary chapels. Their inscriptions all related to the solar symbolism of the benben.
They had benbens. Do you think they had hers? Might be the wrong time period, though. Yes, I know, it was terrible.
The pyramidia of the pyramids of Giza were never recovered. The reconstitution you see in the game is fictive, incorporating a golden pyramidion bearing inscriptions relevant to Khufu.
Welcome to Secrets of the Great Pyramid. Built around 2550 BCE, the Great Pyramid of Giza is considered one of the most iconic structures of Egypt. It is the biggest of the pyramids and the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing. The numbers associated to the Great Pyramid of Giza are impressive. A workforce of over 20,000 people, 6 million tons of stone, and 20 years of construction. It was a massive undertaking for a pharaoh's tomb. The construction of the Great Pyramid was also a display of power and opulence on the part of Khufu. It is part of the pharaoh's vast funerary complex, which also includes 2 temples, 3 satellite pyramids, a causeway, and a builder's necropolis. We can guess that the intent behind the construction of these monuments was Khufu's way of declaring himself one of the most powerful pharaohs to rule a unified Egypt. New insights into engineering and ancient Egyptian culture are still being revealed over 4,500 years later. For example, a recently unearthed papyrus offers a glimpse into the life of a tradesman at the time of the pyramid's construction. Also, a logbook belonging to a team leader during the building gives details on the craftsmen, their work schedules, and the raw materials required.
Remember when I read about construction of the pyramids back when I was a wee one. According to the theories back then, it was all slave labor. These days, the theory has shifted towards more towards, you know, actual craftspeople and people hired and paid for or doing all the dragging.
It is interesting to note that by Cleopatra's time, the pyramid's celestial purpose, its construction, and the function of its mysterious inner chambers was already unclear. Today, it is only through dedicated research that we have begun to grasp some of the Great Pyramid's mysteries.
Or, you know, if you're one of those people, they were built by aliens.
The Egyptians had polished their design for centuries by the time work on the Great Pyramid began. Intended as a tomb for Khufu, the Great Pyramid's structural design has been considered to be nearly perfect by engineers and historians ever since. Precisely oriented north-south to the 4 cardinal points of a compass, the length of each side of the Great Pyramid at its base was 230 meters, and its original height was 147 meters. The pyramid is a mere 0.05% error away from being a perfect square. In order to achieve the shape of a true pyramid, the design required many considerations in the planning phases as well as precision during execution. It was especially critical that they control the angle of inclination on all sides at every stage of construction. Materials for the Great Pyramid consisted of quarried limestone blocks, weighing between 2 to 15 tons each. The methods of moving these blocks into place is still debated by architects and Egyptologists. The precision of its design in an age with only soft metal tools, as well as the enormous scale of its construction, make the Great Pyramid one of the most impressive feats of human engineering. It's estimated that it took between 600,000 and 2 million blocks of stone to build the Great Pyramid. Experts calculate it would have required men to move 12 blocks every hour around the clock for 20 years to place the 2.3 million stones the monument is made of. While the interior chambers were built with red granite from Aswan, most of the pyramid was made from local limestone, weighing between 2 to 15 tons per block. There is debate on how the pyramid stones were moved into place. Recent research is exploring the idea that it was built around a large interior ramp. The recently discovered logbook confirms that the high-quality limestone of the outer casing was brought by boat across the Nile from a quarry in Tura. Once complete, the smooth white polished stone of the Great Pyramid would have reflected the sunlight like a beacon, earning it the name the Horizon of Khufu. Over the centuries, thieves and travelers attempted to access the Great Pyramid numerous times. Ancient writings describe details of its interior, proof that some made their way within, though who gained entrance first and when is unknown. The main entrance of the Great Pyramid is located 17 meters above ground level. It faces north, likely in order to align with the North Star. Though the entrance passageway had been discovered in antiquity, any further access into the Great Pyramid was stopped by massive vertical slabs of rock. As such, present-day visitors to the pyramid must use the robber's entrance. The robber's entrance is reported to have been opened in the 9th century by Caliph al-Mamun. In search of treasure, the Caliph had his men dig their way inside the Great Pyramid. The most likely scenario is that they enlarged a corridor which had been created by tomb robbers during antiquity. As such, this is how the team can justify access to this wonder. Attempts to gain entry to the Great Pyramid and uncover its potential secrets continued throughout the centuries. In the 19th century, the belief that another entry existed at the south side resulted in a hole being blasted into the pyramid's side, with no results for the damage that was done. While the search is still ongoing today to uncover more hidden rooms and passageways, conservation is the primary concern of all such efforts. Welcome to the Great Pyramid, Subterranean Chamber. From the original entrance of the Great Pyramid, there is a passage leading to the subterranean chamber. Its walls were carved out of the existing rock of the plateau and then covered in a fine, unmarked limestone. The descending passage has a steep 26-degree downward slope. Narrow and with a low ceiling, this pathway is long and challenging. While the original passage was 145 meters long, the team reduced its length and made it both wider and higher. The main focus of the work in reproducing the location was centered upon preserving the unique claustrophobic environment of the Great Pyramid, while still allowing for a smooth game navigation. The well shaft was a 58-meter vertical passage that connected the descending corridor to the grand gallery above. An adjacent grotto may have originally been a small natural well in the bedrock that was enlarged during the tunneling. Whether the grotto was intended for another purpose is uncertain. There is much speculation over the purpose of the well shaft. One theory is that the channel was cut or enlarged to supply air to workers in the descending passage. Another is that it was meant to provide an exit route once the work was done in the heart of the pyramid. Without the well shaft, workers would have been trapped inside forever when the Grand Gallery was sealed. The opening at the bottom of the well shaft was most likely sealed by exiting workers to camouflage the passageway. There is a subterranean chamber at the end of the descending corridor, 30 meters below the Giza Plateau surface. Dug directly into the bedrock, the space is wide with a ceiling 3 meters in height. Its floors and walls are rough and uneven, indicating that it was never completed. At the south end of the room, there is another narrow corridor, similar to the others, though it abruptly ends after roughly 20 meters. The chamber also contains an 11-meter pit near the east side. It's unclear what this may have been used for. In the game, this well leads to a fictive underground complex containing key game-related mysteries. The subterranean chamber's original purpose remains a mystery. One popular theory is that it was originally meant to be Khufu's burial chamber, but the pharaoh changed his mind, preferring to be buried higher up in the pyramid, which would explain the chamber's unfinished state.
Welcome to the Great Pyramid of Giza, Upper Chambers. At the entrance of the ascending passage are 3 granite flagstones estimated to weigh up to 25 tons each. They were used to protect the Great Pyramid from thieves. Undaunted by the granite blocks, the thieves simply dug into the softer limestone around them, thus creating the robber's entrance. At the entrance of the ascending, while in reality the robber's entrance is one single cavity which leads to both passages. In the game, the team created individual accesses to either passage. As such, in the game, one entrance leads to the ascending passage, while another leads to the descending passage. The ascending passageway of the Great Pyramid provides a direct path into the Grand Gallery and is accessed 30 meters from the entrance along the descending corridor. Both corridors have similar dimensions and are designed with the same 26-degree incline. The ascending corridor has smooth masonry on its walls, and the layout includes many trapezoidal stones. Both the floor and ceiling of the passageway indicate that the passage was enlarged, possibly during or after the funeral, to allow workers room to move granite blocks meant to plug the corridor. The Grand Gallery's purpose is still debated among experts. It may have been intended to align with the stars, act as a buffer to protect the king's chamber, or simply to facilitate the transport of the granite blocks used inside the pyramid. Access to the queen's chamber was at the beginning of the Grand Gallery. Though this room is referred to as the Queen's Chamber, it is believed that there was no queen buried here. Based on their knowledge of earlier pyramids, Egyptologists believe it was more likely intended as the king's serdab, a chamber meant to contain the Ka statue, which would in turn house the king's spirit. Situated exactly within the pyramid's center, on the east-west axis of the pyramid, the chamber has a vaulted ceiling and measures 5.7 by 5.2 meters. In the eastern wall, there is a niche tucked away in a small corbelled archway, which may have originally held the Ka statue. Behind this niche is another smaller hole, possibly dug out by thieves in search of further treasure. In the 19th century, two shafts were found running through the north and south walls. They each run in a horizontal line for 2 meters before sloping upward, and both are closed off with limestone blocks fitted with copper handles. Whether they were intended as ventilation shafts for workers or a celestial connection for the pharaoh's spirit is unconfirmed. A recent scan of the room indicated the presence of an unknown cavity hidden behind the north face of the walls over the descending corridor. Further investigation is still ongoing to ascertain the nature of the anomaly, so as to avoid risking damage to the monument. Khufu's architects were possibly influenced by earlier rhomboidal pyramids when designing the gallery. It is the longest corbelled vault ever built, measuring 47 meters long and 8.6 meters high. The walls were made to taper inward, allowing for better distribution of weight. As a result, the ceiling measures just over a meter wide at its highest point. Though this construction technique is present in other pyramids, few have the same precision and stability. While the space is visually dramatic, the gallery seemed to serve a practical function, though what exactly remains uncertain. Still, the wall design was undoubtedly meant to contribute to the stability of the structure, and its floor may have helped workers move the materials. A channel runs along the middle of the room. A movable floor originally rested in this central recess. The raised benches on either side are equipped with slots that may have been used to help position the granite blocking stones. At the end of the Grand Gallery is the entrance to the antechamber leading to the King's Chamber. Directly above, there is another narrower horizontal passage that connects to the top of the King's Chamber and allow the workers access to the weight relief rooms. The far end of the Grand Gallery leads to a small antechamber with a portcullis, preventing access to the King's Chamber. The portcullis was composed of 3 separate granite slabs. They were designed to be lowered into place and seal the chamber after the burial of the king. The grooves dug out to hold the slabs in place are still clearly visible to this day. The elaborate locking system was composed of a series of grooves for the ropes and pulleys that dropped the stones into place like the notches on a key. For the purposes of the game, the team elected to remove the portcullis slabs in order to grant the player access to the King's Chamber. In reality, workers would have backed out of the room after the funeral, lowering each slab into place behind them one at a time. Each of the 3 stones were smashed by looters centuries later, and evidence of their break-in is still evident. The King's Chamber is built entirely out of red granite. The King's Chamber measures 5.8 meters in height. It has an imposing cover of 5 stacked levels above, with granite beams weighing 25 to 40 tons each. The uppermost level is surmounted by a vault of stones, arranged in chevrons, to bear the enormous structural load. As in the Queen's Chamber, two shafts extend out from the room towards the north and south faces of the pyramid. They measure nearly 64 meters until they are blocked by copper-handled granite plugs. Some experts in the culture of the Old Kingdom believe that the shafts were thought to lead the king's soul to the stars, with the incarnation of the pharaoh as the god Ra, represented by the northern well, and the god Horus by the southern well. There is a granite sarcophagus at the west end of the room, but it is the concealed construction inscriptions left by workmen on the roof's stones which verify this as the resting place of Khufu. The sarcophagus was recorded as being empty when it was discovered, and its design indicates that there was once a lid in place. It's possible that this sarcophagus is only a cenotaph in memory of the pharaoh, but was never actually meant to receive the body. Khufu's mummy was never found. It is hoped that as of yet undiscovered hidden rooms and shafts of the pyramid may provide an answer as to its location. Welcome to Jean-Pierre Houdin's Theories. The team wanted to provide players with a sense of exploration and discovery, particularly within the Great Pyramid. As such, a decision was made that the internal design of the monument in the game would reflect Jean-Pierre Houdin's theories. While the antechambers of the king's tomb have yet to be discovered, Houdin posits that this is merely due to a unique design, placing the pharaoh's tomb at the center of the pyramid. The entire tour you are about to take was designed along Houdin's hypotheses. While respecting Houdin's hypothesis as to the general layout of the antechambers, the team wanted the contents to enhance the game experience. In regular royal tombs, the antechambers were filled with all the material goods needed by the pharaoh in the afterlife. To support the feelings of discovery and awe, the art team created a unique and fantastical treasure in this second antechamber. Houdin theorized that the ascending corridor and the Great Gallery were used by the workers to haul hoist the heavy beams above the king's chamber. He called it the service circuit. The corridor you are in now was created by the team following Houdin's theory and is referred to as the noble circuit. It is through this corridor that the wooden sarcophagus containing the pharaoh's mummy would have been transported to its final resting chamber. With this structure in mind, one can easily assume that the pyramid's entrance would have been connected to the two antechambers. Modern research has revealed that a cavity might be located behind the north face chevrons of the pyramid. As such, the team chose to create this area for the player to explore. Here is where Houdin believes that the priests and nobles would have exited the pyramid after the burial ceremony. Many theories regarding the construction of the Great Pyramid rely on the usage of external ramps. However, Houdet believes an external ramp would have been too steep for the upper portion of the pyramid. This is why he posits that there were two ramps. An external ramp for about half of the height of the pyramid, which then became an internal ramp for the second half. Houdet's theory states that this internal ramp followed the sides of the pyramid in an ascending spiral pattern. A notch discovered in the edge of the Great Pyramid, known as Bob's Room, seems to support this theory. Located at the corners of each edge of the pyramid, these large rooms would have allowed workers to turn the stone by 90 degrees, allowing them to continue the ascent. The team chose to create rooms such as this one, bringing Houdet's hypothesis to life.
They could have mentioned why it's called Bob's Room. Bob. Bobba Hotep, perhaps?
This long corridor was the first section of the ascending internal ramp. Through it, the blocks used to build the Great Pyramid would have been carefully moved upward and then turned at each edge of the pyramid in order to continue their ascent. Though the team only created the main ramp for the game, Houdet posits that this ramp had two levels, allowing workers to return safely to the bottom thanks to an additional corbelled upper section. According to Houdet, the start of the inner ramp was located at the base of the southeastern face of the pyramid. This location would have been the junction point of the external and internal ramps. Below us, workers would have built the lower part of the pyramid with the external ramp before eventually switching to the internal ramp for the middle and upper sections of the pyramid. At that time in the process, they could have reused the material of the external ramp to fill the center of the pyramid, hauling the stones in through the internal ramp. Welcome to Khafre's funerary complex. Since the very beginning of the Fourth Dynasty, mortuary temples were built adjacent to pyramids on the eastern side. Such a location, facing the rising sun, as well as the world of the living as a whole, held an important symbolic meaning. for it was within the mortuary temple that kings were revived through daily rituals. In its standard form, a mortuary temple was divided into two parts: a front area which consisted of a vestibule and a courtyard, and an area in the back where all sacred elements were located. The back of the temple incorporated several essential features, including an inner sanctuary with a false door, which allowed the soul of the pharaoh to travel between the world of the dead and the world of the living. The largest of all such structures, Khafre's mortuary temple was entirely built with megalithic blocks of limestone from a nearby quarry and encased with granite. Parts of Khafre's mortuary temple, particularly the courtyard walls, are thought to have been decorated with splendid reliefs. However, not a single image of the king has been discovered inside the mortuary temple.
Been a bit of a relief.
Khufu's direct successor, Jedefre, followed the custom which required each king to establish a new site for their funerary accommodation, and chose Abu Rawash as his last resting place. When the time came to build his own funerary complex, Khafre, also one of Khufu's sons and the successor to Jedefre, broke with tradition and returned to Giza. Not only did Khafre thumb his nose at tradition, but he did so in a way which he hoped would allow him to overshadow his father's most important monument. Though Khafre's pyramid is smaller than Khufu's, it was cunningly built on a more elevated bedrock layer than the Great Pyramid, making it appear higher than any other pyramid at Giza. Today, Khafre's pyramid is the only one among the three at Giza that still has the upper part of its limestone casing. Considered a most sacred area, the Giza necropolis was strictly defined, both geographically and physically. An 8-meter-thick Tura limestone wall completely surrounded the Great Pyramid. The only way inside would have been through the mortuary temple. From the reign of Sneferu and onwards, the subsidiary pyramid became a common feature within the pyramidal complex. The function of the subsidiary pyramid, however, smaller in size and in height than the royal tomb, remains unclear, though some believe that it was meant to house the ka of the pharaoh. In mainstream media, the ka is often defined as the soul of the deceased. The truth is a bit more complicated. Within the ancient Egyptian funerary belief system, the ka was a component of a living person, which separated itself from the body at the time of death. It represented the deceased's vital essence. In order for the deceased to ascend to a new life, whether in this world or the next, the ka had to be embodied in a statue, and its existence maintained through offerings and rituals. Within Khafre's subsidiary pyramid, a wooden box containing pieces of cedar was discovered by archaeologists. When reassembled, it turned out to be a shrine mounted on a sled. Just as with the solar barges found around Khufu's pyramid, it seems Khafre's shrine and sled were ritually disposed of after his funeral.
This is the last one.
Welcome to Menkaura's funerary complex. The dimensions of Menkaura's pyramid are much less grandiose. However, unlike its predecessors, Menkaura's pyramid shows a great deal of complexity in its internal and external finish. The outside was partially covered in red granite, while the internal walls were richly decorated. This latter innovation would not catch on until the end of the 5th dynasty, when pyramid texts began to adorn the walls. Menkaura's pyramid contains 2 sloping passages, both located in the northern side of the structure. The upper one was abandoned during the construction phase, whereas the lower one, slightly above the base of the monument, constitutes the real entrance. The lower passage leads to a first room, which, for the first time since the reign of Djoser, is decorated with engraved false doors.
Hey, well, welcome. I'm afraid we're on the last of the tours.
While Menkaura's pyramid complex was unfinished at the time of his death, it was hastily and somewhat shabbily completed by his successor, Shepseskaf. Even so, this funerary structure marks a watershed in the history of this kind of monument. From then onwards, the pyramid shrank, whereas the mortuary temple expanded both in its quantitative and qualitative aspects. Of particular note, it is within Menkaura's mortuary temple that one can find the heaviest block of limestone ever used for a pyramid complex, weighing in at over 200 tons.
200. Oh. That's perfectly all right.
Menkaura's causeway was completed in mud brick by the king's successor, whereas the lower part was nothing more than a simple ramp. As for the Valley Temple, it was built in 2 phases. The foundations were first laid out in limestone during Menkaura's reign, but the temple itself was completed in mud brick afterwards. As such, the Valley Temple was soon damaged and ended up being completely rebuilt during the 6th dynasty.
I wouldn't mind a nap myself.
Three small structures, referred to as Menkaura's Queen's Pyramids, were erected along the southern side of the main pyramid. One of them was a smooth-faced pyramid, while the other 2 were more basic step pyramids. It is difficult to assess whether the latter were designed as such, or were left unfinished with no casing to smooth out their surfaces. The easternmost pyramid was built with the traditional rooms and corridors found within a satellite pyramid meant to house the king's Ka. However, a granite sarcophagus was found within, leading to the conclusion that it was used as an actual tomb rather than as a symbolic cenotaph. Drawing on these observations, some assume that this pyramid was first built as a satellite pyramid for the king's Ka, before seeing its purpose change to that of a queen's tomb. Which queen, however, remains a mystery.
Oh, I had no idea that you'd get a prize for completing all the tours. Well, that means that all the tours in Egypt have been completed. So it's far too early to end the stream. We'll just, I was about to say do a quick game change, but it's not that quick. But I'm going to change the game and then we'll start on the tours in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. You just hang on for a minute. Should probably consider doing one of those game change things. You know. All in good time. Hello, Greek boy. Alrighty then. See if this works. I probably should have, checked to see if the Discovery Tour thing works, but We'll find out together. At least is thinking about it.
Visitor, you are about to embark on a journey of discovery through the rich and fascinating history of classical Greece. You'll become fully immersed in the painstakingly detailed world built for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which you are free to explore at your own pace, without any danger or time pressure. For a directed experience, take one of the many guided tours curated by prominent historians and archaeologists. Along the way, exchange words with some of Greece's most famous historical persons. The classical Greece you are about to explore is at the peak of its glory. This period is synonymous with grand accomplishments of the physical and the mental. Architectural marvels which still stand today dot its landscape, while towering achievements in philosophy, political systems, and art still influence our modern society in profound ways. We hope you become engrossed in the dazzling riches of ancient Greece and welcome you to your visit.
Τι συνέβη μόλις?
Greetings, wanderer, and welcome to the Acropolis, the shining jewel of Athens. My name is Aspasia. Though I am not originally from Athens, I have climbed to the top of its social ladder using my wit and intellect. I've even earned the love of Pericles, one of the most powerful men in the city. The mind truly is a beautiful thing. Personally, I think the Acropolis is one of, if not the, greatest place in all of Greece. Though, considering it was the project of my partner, Pericles, I may be a touch biased. The Acropolis of Athens is a bastion of art and culture worthy of the gods themselves. Within this citadel, you will find many important sacred buildings, as well as some of the most magnificent art in all of Greece. You are in for a very enlightening visit. When you're done, come find me, and we can discuss the things you have seen. Farewell for now.
The Acropolis has gone through many changes in its long history. It began as a simple rock, was settled as early as the Neolithic period and then became a fortress in the Mycenaean period. Stone buildings started appearing in the 7th century BCE. But the famous structures whose ruins remain visible today date mainly from a period of construction in the 5th century BCE. The location of the Acropolis is closely tied with Athens' foundation myth. Supposedly, it was the site where Athena and Poseidon competed for the city's patronage. This connection gave the Acropolis a sacred aura, and it was considered the religious heart of the city.
Γάτη σου μετα φύλων συμμοριτών, των ιών μου εξοικίας απήγαγων και παραλατομίου.
The Temple of Athena Nike was built on the remains of old fortifications from the Mycenaean era. Worship at the temple can be traced back to the 6th century BCE, but the building itself was destroyed during the Greco-Persian Wars a century later. It was rebuilt during the Peloponnesian War. Given that the name Athena Nike roughly means Athena of victory, it was likely constructed in the hopes that Athens would win the war. Unusually, the temple depicts historical scenes of battles against the Persians instead of the more mythologically inclined art of other Greek buildings. The temple's priestess was chosen randomly among the Athenians and received a salary of 50 drachmae annually, along with skins and trophies from sacrificed animals.
Λόγω εξήγησης των πουλήσεων η τραγωδία κινείται μεταξύ.
Well, I suppose we'll find out how terrible my Greek pronunciations are. Propyl... Propylia. Close enough. It was the monumental gateway on the western side of the Acropolis. It was built between 433 and 432 BCE under supervision of either Phidias or Memsiculus, and was part of Pericles' plan to adorn the Acropolis with magnificent monuments. Although it was not seen as a military structure, it was also used to restrict access to Athens' holiest area. Okay, that's going to make it difficult. Okay. It was conceived as a spectacular construction of Pentelic white marble and Euthanaisian grey marble, and its design was meant to stylistically mirror the Parthenon. The Propylia's construction was suspended in 431 BCE due to the start of the Peloponnesian War, and was never resumed. This meant that out of a very ambitious project, only the main building was finished. Nevertheless, with its 5 gates and a ceiling painted with golden stars, it remained impressive. The gateway was also unique in that it mixed both Doric and Ionic columns, in addition to being reinforced with iron. The northern wing of the western facade housed a 10.75 meter times 9 meters ritual dining room known as the Pinakotheke. According to Pausanias, the Pinakotheke was famous in antiquity for its paintings of Greek battles. Yeah, wow. Greek. Not my best.
The Acropolis was built up over a long period, due in no small part to its partial destruction during the Greco-Persian Wars. It was in the 5th century BCE, though, that the Acropolis received its most significant improvements. This period was an extremely prosperous time for Athens, both financially and culturally. With a booming economy bolstered by trade and the Lavrion silver mines, Pericles, the leader of Athens, financed a huge project to rebuild the citadel. He enlisted the help of renowned artists, like the sculptor Phidias, as well as the architects Iktinos and Callicrates. Together, they erected buildings like the Parthenon and the Propylaea Gateway. Pericles' goal was to make the Acropolis into a glorious monument to the gods and to mortal Athenians.
Η τραγωδία κινείται μεταξύ τριών βαθμίδων. Τη συνεκτιμήσε δεόντως τα προσδόκητα του πελάτη.
The Acropolis.
Μετά τι παριστάνε το άλγος αυτό. Πού αλλού ευρίσκεται η γνώση η μη πάρεξ ότι ο εχέφρον ούκ επενεργεί επικλαθμόν και ο δυρμόν.
I would like to formally apologize to anyone who knows anything about Greek pronunciation.
Μόνον όταν το επιχείρημα δομείται πιστικόν, τότε δίνεταν κερδάν εν ζυγέ.
Priest house. In ancient Greeks, priests and priestesses were either designated or elected from among citizens and clerical families. They performed sacred rituals on special occasions like festivals or when otherwise required. Priest houses are often linked with the priesthood, but priests did not actually live in them, preferring to stay in their own homes in the city's residential quarter. Instead, the main purpose of priest houses was to provide priests with a space to carry out their rituals during specific days on the religious calendar. Priest houses were considered too sacred for the mundane activities of daily life, and priests had to perform purification rituals, such as a period of chastity, before they were allowed to enter.
Πρώμεθα το παραδείγματι των έργων αυτού ή να αντιβάλλουμε το δέον γενέστε εις τεινά συλλογισμών, αλλά ότι στέμιδος ναός ούκ εστί πανήγυρης ή να σταθεί εν επιχείρημα δύο ιών.
There was a short program where we go through at my gymnasium or high school, whatever you want to call it, where we went through some of the more, shall we say, ancient Greco-Roman cultures and all that. And we were allowed, or we were told that we had to learn to pronounce some of these names, just in case we actually had to do an exam in it. It was not my best subject, and this was 1992. But I haven't really touched Greek pronunciation since then, so Yeah, this is going to be bad.
Θεόν πάτερ ιδέκαιε, σκυπτούχε κούρε, δημάτορ, βοτριόκοσμεο.
Oh dear, I read that as Athena's endgame. Athena Agana. In many ancient texts, the goddess Athena bears the attribute Agana, which refers to a patronage of craftsmen and artisans and other crafts. Athena Agana was mainly associated with spinning and weaving. She protected women who produced textiles, and in return they offered her spindles, loom weights, raw wool, and textiles as dedications. On ancient painted vases, Athena Agana was often represented as either an artisan in a tool-filled workshop or as an owl next to objects symbolizing certain crafts. For example, an owl next to a wool basket was sometimes stamped on loom weights used by weavers. It is not clear if Athena Agana was an actual cult, like Athena Polias, but it is evident that the goddess bearing this epithet received dedications and offerings from all sorts of artisans. Moreover, the sacred peplas given to the goddess during the Panathenaea was woven under the auspices of Athena Agana.
Μεγαλώνουμε και πολιώνουμε, φωνία και θηροκτώνε. Αγλαό τραγωδία διαφτέρει τους νέους. Επικαλούμε σε μάκα, πολιώνουμε, κακό αποφέρεται το σιρί του ατόπου το θάνατο.
Artemis Auronia. The sanctuary of Artemis Auronia, or the... oh dear gods. Greek, why do you hate me so? Ronion was located near the Propylia. In a city dominated with dedications to Athena, the Brauronian stood out for its focus on Artemis Brauronia, the goddess who presided over girls from puberty to childbirth. It was likely installed by the ruler Pisistratos, a native of Brauron. It's probable the sanctuary was built for a smaller branch of the main cult of Artemis Brauronia. It consists of a portico and a wooden statue that was later replaced with a marble one, carved by the famous sculptor Praxiteles.
Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας ένεκεν. Τραγωδία εκλαμβάνει τας ιστορίας μεγαλώνει με θεά, αγλαώτη. Επικαλούμε σε μάκα, πολιώνει με
πολλά χρήματα τον πρώτο ευρέτηνα ασχολία.
They're not making this easy for me, are they? Chalcotheke. Chalcotheke? Probably forget that in about 15 seconds. Well, in that case, you should probably start to warm up your pointing finger. Yeah, now I forgot how to pronounce it again. Chalcotheke. The Chalcotheke, meaning bronze storehouse, was built in the available space between the Parthenon, the Temple of Artemis Brauronia, and the Acropolis' southern wall. The building was used as a storehouse for the bronze and iron items of Athens' treasury, either around 450 BCE during the reform of the First Delian League, or in 370 BCE, when Athenian imperial ambitions were once again on the rise after recovering from their defeat in the Peloponnesian War. Most information on the Chalcotheke was preserved on 4th century BC inscriptions, which were displayed nearby and contained detailed inventories of the building's items, including metal vases, statues, and above all, weapons and armor. The Chalcotheke therefore also functioned as a military arsenal, as further evidenced by the stockpile of artillery and naval equipment the Athenians stored in the building in 320 BCE.
Behind the Propylaea was the giant bronze statue of Athena Promachos, or Athena who fights on the front lines. That name was reflected in the spear and shield the statue held in its hands. It was erected in the mid-5th century BCE by the artist Phidias. According to an inscription, it took 9 years to make and cost almost 500,000 drachmae. At approximately 10 meters tall, the statue was apparently so large that Pausanias claimed its helmet and spear tip could be seen from the sea near Cape Sunion, 60 kilometers away. The ornamentation on the statue's shield was engraved by the metalsmith Mies.
Athena, who was miraculously born from Zeus's head. Not sure. They broke open his skull to let her out, didn't they? Oh. Athena was one of the most important deities in the Greek pantheon. In the Bronze Age, she was an Aegean goddess who protected lucrative palatial and household activities, such as wool processing. Later on, she became the patron deity of many ancient Greek cities, with Athens being only the best known among them. However, she still kept her place as the protector of artisans, spinners, weavers, smiths, and the like. The goddess had numerous epithets reflecting specific attributes, including Athena Boreas, the protector of the city, Athena Agana, protector of crafts, and Athena Promachos, fighting in the first rank, which alluded to her worship as a martial deity. She was also conceived as a goddess of wisdom, and her most famous symbol was the owl, which was often engraved on Athenian coins and painted on vases. And of course the goddess of wisdom in Terry Pratchett's Discworld books were the artist who made her primary statue didn't know what an owl looked like, so she wound up with being represented by penguins. Rather cranky looking penguins at that.
The Araphoroi were young girls between the ages of 7 and 11 who were in charge of special rites. A list of 4 girls was drafted by the Assembly of Citizens, from which the High Magistrate, the Archon Basileus, chose 2 to serve as Eraphoroi for the year. The girls lived in a house on the Acropolis. They were in charge of carrying sacred objects and weaving the peplos of Athena. The peplos was a sacred robe offered to Athena during Panathenaea, a festival held in her honor.
Olive Tree of Athena. Today, an olive tree grows on the western side of the Erechtheion. Though it was planted in 1952 by members of the American School of Archaeology, it is conveniently believed to be descended from a sacred olive tree planted during the foundation of Athens. Myth says that when Athena and Poseidon competed to become the patron deity of the new city, they were required to bring gifts to its citizens. Athena struck the Acropolis with her spear, and the sacred olive tree sprouted from the ground. For these reasons, ancient Greeks thought that Athenian olive trees were the holiest in all of Hellas. Herodotus and Pausanias both report that the Persians burned the tree in 480 BCE, only for it to grow again from its ashes on the very same day. This miraculous revival is the archetype for all the other subsequent resurrections of the tree. Yeah, sorry about that, Uli. I had only about, what was it? Yeah, about an hour's worth of pyramids, and then we went on to Odyssey instead. Since I'd run out of Discovery Tour. And now I'm butchering Greek. As I told Mel, my Greek is absolutely horrendous, so the Erathion Caryatids. Caryatids? Well, true. You made it while I'm still streaming. A caryatid is an ancient architectural pillar or column in the shape of a young maiden. Many ancient buildings had caryatids, but the most famous of them is the Erechtheion. Good grief. Its south porch was embellished with 6 caryatids, which were known in ancient Athens as chorai, or young maidens. According to the Roman architect, Vitruvius, the maiden-shaped columns were inspired by the women of the Laconian town of Caryae near Sparta. Caryae's inhabitants betrayed the Greeks by plotting with the Persians, and as a consequence for this crime, the male population of the city was slaughtered while the women were enslaved. Hence their depictions as burden-bearing pillars. Shouldn't it be burden-bearing and not barring? Other more positive myths suggest that the caryatids were inspired by the tall and beautiful maidens of Caria, who would dance for the goddess Artemis. The caryatid usage in the Erechtheion, where they stand above Cecop's tomb, might be related to the king's funerary cult, as they originally held Yalei, vessels for pouring libations to the dead. If you consider my pronunciation of Greek and the quality of same, I'd like you to imagine my pronunciation of anything French, which is going to be even worse. The invasion of Attica. In the aftermath of the Battle of Thermopylae, the Athenian authorities announced that it was up to the city's own population to protect their families from the oncoming Persian threat. Athens' people scattered to Salamis, Aegina, and Argolis, and it is said that even the sacred snakes that protected the Acropolis fled the city. By the time the Persian army arrived in Athens, the only people left on the Acropolis were the sacred treasurers and the people who had stayed behind to barricade the citadel. The Persians killed all the remaining Greeks and set fire to all of the Acropolis, including the olive tree of Athena. Allegedly, the sacred tree miraculously grew back the following day, a hopeful image that ties in nicely with the Greeks' victory at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE. Altar of Athena. The most important element of ancient Greek cults was the sacrifice to gods. Consequently, the most important structures were the altars where the sacrifices were slaughtered and burnt. Therefore, the great altar of Athena, Holias, the patron deity of Athens, was the holiest and most significant monument on the Acropolis. The exact location of the altar is unknown, but it seems that it was erected to the east of the Erechtheion, in the northern, most sacred part of the Acropolis. While other buildings were frequently dismantled and erected anew, the altar's position did not change for hundreds of years. In Pericles' time, the altar built circa 525 BCE by the sons of the great tyrant Pisistratos, was probably remodeled as an impressive structure so that it could easily host sacrifices as large as the Pan-Athenian festivals hecatomb, which involved the slaughtering of 100 cattle, as implied by its name, hecaton, 100, bos, ox. That's all thought of slaughtering.
Υπάρχει συστάς αστέρων υγρενόντων.
The Erechtheion was an atypical temple. It was dedicated not only to Athena Polias, but also to Kekrops, the mythical founder of Athens, his son Erechtheos, and even Poseidon, the sea god who challenged Athena for possession of the city. The temple was divided into sections. The eastern part housed a statue dedicated to Athena, while the western section jointly belonged to Poseidon and Erechtheos. Meanwhile, King Kekrop's grave was believed to be under the caryatid porch. Under the temple was a crypt that was said to contain the sacred snakes of Athena. The snakes may have had a sweet tooth because the priestesses of Athena allegedly fed them honey cakes.
Snakes eating honey cakes? Priesthood. There were no professional qualifications needed to become a priest or a priestess. A wealthy family, luck, and less often, the will of the public assembly were the only criteria that mattered. Many priesthoods stayed within the same families or clans for generations, as the appointment of priests outside its members of the clan was strictly prohibited. Oops. For example, in Athens, both the priestess of Athena Polias and Poseidon Erechtheus had to come from the oh dear gods, Theobutadai. Right. Priests and priestesses were in charge of the sacrifices to the gods and of any other cultic duties preserved by tradition. They also assisted political leaders and other citizens who wished to correctly perform public and private religious activities. Lastly, they presided over the affairs and resources of their assigned sanctuary. They were held in high esteem by their fellow citizens, and their political opinions carried a lot of weight in public debates. In certain cities, the annual priesthood of the main cult was even used as a way of measuring time. Priests and priestesses also received significant shares of the sacrifices they performed. Although priests generally enjoyed the same freedoms and rights as citizens, like that of living at their own homes, they also had to follow restrictive rules. Besides more general requirements such as fasting and undergoing a period of chastity before certain rituals, there are also strange restrictions. For example, in Attica, the priestess of Athena Polias was not allowed to eat cheese. Not allowed to eat cheese? Come on. That's just... Ooh.
Θεόν Πάτερ, η δε και η σκυπτούς.
Θα έχω ευποδία και η μη καλή φωνή. Ο πατήρ μου έλεγε δίνει με δίνε εις θέατρο.
Sanctuary of Zeus, Polias. Besides Athena, Polias, and Poseidon, Erechtheus, Athenians believed the city was also protected by Zeus and Polias of the city. This was based on Zeus being the judge of Athena and Poseidon's mythological mythical competition to become Athens' chief deity. Consequently, a small, walled, open-aired sanctuary was erected to Zeus Polius circa 500 BCE. There are no traces left of it, other than cuttings in the bedrock interpreted by archaeologists to be either remnants of a barn for sacrificial animals or chutes designed to lead the animals to slaughter. The main ritual dedicated to Zeus Polius was the Onia, the ox murderer, which took place each summer during the greater festival of Dipolyeia. 2 working oxen, whose sacrifice was normally prohibited, were led to the sanctuary altar where grain was spread. The first ox to eat the grain was considered to consent to being sacrificed and was slain by a member of the Thaulonidae family, who subsequently had to throw aside his axe and flee the Acropolis. That man and his companions were later tried for murder, but always acquitted. In the end, the sacrificial axe, or knife, was found guilty and thrown into the sea. Follow me unimpressed. The ritual, believed to be very archaic, was based on the myth of a priest who accidentally killed a ploughing ox and had to expiate the sin through annual sacrifices to Zeus. It reminded the ancient Athenians that laboring beasts should not be sacrificed, and that they should respect the sacred laws of raising special sacrificial animals. Modern scholars also think the ritual was a means to explain how humanity passed from grain and honey offerings to animal sacrifices. I'd be more okay with the honey and grain.
Εγώ. Εστί τούτο το δώρο αυτής εκ του τάφου.
Can't remember.
Και ο ήχος. Ή έστιν η πίστη. Ήμεν το σου το προσδετή.
Ως γέγηθα ατεωρώνσε.
Αληθές εστί.
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να συναντήσει με οίκη.
Ναι, όμως γάμος εστί επιχείρηση.
I did remember to make a boo command.
Άτυρ μου εκληρονόμησε νοικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Πως ήθισε τα πρικό έσονται του ανδρός της.
Επιθυμούμεν θύνε ρήτραν ή ούπες γεννήσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετέρω δύο αγαπά.
The Parthenon is one of the most well-known buildings in the world and an enduring symbol of ancient Greek civilization. While it is located on the Acropolis, the building is not a traditional temple. It was built by the sculptor Phidias and the architects Callicrates and Ictinus as a great monument to the glory of the city of Athens. That glory is evident in its many carvings. One of the most carved monuments in Greek architecture, the Parthenon's decorations depict several mythological scenes. These include the birth of Athena, her fight against Poseidon for the patronage of Athens, the gods' battle with the giants, and the procession of the great Panathenaea.
Μία μίλια πίτνουσα αναμένουσα τον νύχτα.
Η μία ο πρεσβύτερος πέθηκε άπαντα αφήνεμη.
Μία κάκρο λέγον εγώ. Εστί τούτο το δώρο αυτής εκ του τάφου. Και ο ήχος.
sip of tea. Sanctuary of Pandion. The easternmost building on the Acropolis was the open-air walled sanctuary of Pandion, built circa 450 BCE. Pandion was a mythical Athenian hero invented in order to explain the beginnings of old rituals dedicated to certain gods, in this case Zeus. He was probably credited with being the first to perform the rites of Pandia, a festival believed to have been dedicated to Zeus. The sanctuary housed his statue and served as a hero. Never seen that word before. Heroon, or a hero shrine. Modern scholars believe that this sanctuary's Pandion to be one of the two legendary Athenian kings, either Pandion I, son of Erechtheus, Eunice, or Pandion II, father of Aegeus. When Cleisthenes established Athens' democracy in 507 BCE and divided the population in 10 newly created tribes, Pandion was selected to give his name to the Pandonius tribe, thus becoming one of the eponymous protectors of the Athenian population. Another statue of him was raised in the Agora, Athens' marketplace and public square, as part of the sculptural ensemble of the 10 eponymous heroes.
The Parthenon's inner chamber, or cella, contained a massive statue of Athena that was considered to be one of the sculptor Phidias's greatest masterpieces. The statue was chryselephantine, a combination of gold and ivory. To justify the steep cost of its construction, Pericles told Athenians that the statue was a gold reserve, which could be disassembled in times of economic distress. The cella also allegedly contained a pool, whose main purpose was to control the room's humidity, which helped preserve the statue's ivory. Just admiring the view. Very nice view. Athens' treasury was located in the Parthenon, where it was believed to be protected by Athena herself. The treasury contained objects of great value, acquired from different conquests, as well as a mass of minted silver coins and various offerings to Athena. Pericles also decided to move the entirety of the Delian League's treasure to the Parthenon in 454 BCE. This was a great testament to Athens' power over the rest of Greece. The riches were divided into two parts, the Demosia, which belonged to the city, and the Hiera Cremata, which was dedicated to the goddess and only used for religious purposes.
Missed one of those discovery sites. Yep, I did. The great Panathenaea. The Panathenaea was the most important religious festival in ancient Athens. It was held each year at the end of July and beginning of August. Every 4 years the festival was celebrated on an even greater scale. This was known as the Great Panathenaea. According to some scholars, the Great Panathenaea was expanded from the Lesser Panathenaea by the tyrant Pisistratus in 566 BCE to serve as Athens' own version of the Olympic Games. The celebrations included a day procession of Athenian citizens and resident aliens, athletic games, music, and rhapsodic contests, a night procession with a torch relay race, great sacrifices, and communal feasting. The festival was so important to ancient Athenians that many iconographic, sculptural, and written testimonies of the celebrations were preserved. Furthermore, numerous Panatheniaic amphoras, containers, were discovered all over the Greek world. They were great vessels filled with the most expensive Athenian olive oil and were awarded to the winners of the Panatheniaic Games. The amphoras were decorated with specific scenes, such as young men running or Athena Promachus wearing military equipment, and they could be sold by the champions for significant amounts of money. Now back to the tour guide. It sounded like I was going to be tested. Oops, sorry.
And what did you think of the Acropolis? It truly is quite something, isn't it? A sacred sanctuary and an architectural marvel, all in one. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Oh dear.
You're confident enough for a test? Very well. Let us see how much you know. Which two gods competed for Athens' patronage? Correct. It was Poseidon and Athena who fought for Athens' patronage. As for who won, the answer is in the city's name. On to the next question. Who sculpted the statue of Athena in the Parthenon?
I like that one.
Correct. The renowned sculptor Phidias made the statue, which was considered one of his masterpieces. And now, the final question. Which king's tomb was believed to be under the caryatid porch?
Ooh, that's one of those remembering things.
That is correct. Cecrops was the mythological first king of Athens, and his tomb was said to be under the Erechtheion. It seems you know much about this place. Well done, wanderer.
Perfectly fair, Oli. Enjoy your lurk.
Very well. On to the next tour.
Welcome, traveler, to the ruins of Mykene. My name is Herodotus, and I am a traveler from Hyrcanassus. I retrace the cause of various events, such as wars and great calamities. I describe what I see and record what I'm told, all with the aim of providing a better understanding of why these things occur. Look for me to introduce you to many sites. It is humbling to stand in the remnants of such a great civilization. Looking at these ruins, I am reminded that the past is never as far behind us as we think. These are the ruins of Mykene, center of the old Mykenean civilization. It was home to great warriors and heroes. In many ways, places like Athens and Sparta stand on the shoulders of its accomplishments. This tour will take you through its ruins and introduce you to its most important monuments, revealing its history in the process. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The Mycenaean civilization flourished in the Late Bronze Age between 1600 and 1200 BCE. During this period, it was mainly located in the Peloponnese and central Greece. Mycenaeans were known for exploring distant lands. Notably, they battled the Hittite-allied city of Walusa in a conflict that was believed to be the inspiration for Homer's Trojan War. But the Mycenaean people didn't only travel to fight. They learned much from their neighbors, the Minoans of Crete, such as how to write syllabic script on clay tablets. Such tablets provide evidence that Mycenaeans spoke an early form of Greek. They also tell of how great Mycenaean kings ruled over their warriors from opulent palaces in places like Mycenae, Thebes, and Knossos. The entrance to Agamemnon's citadel, or the Lion Gate, is one of the most iconic monuments in Mycenae. It is impressive for both its height and for the intimidating rendering on its relief, which depicts two lions standing on either side of a column. Unfortunately, the lions' heads, which were presumably made of a precious metal or higher quality stone, have been lost to time. The gate was most likely meant to greet a triumphant king returning home from successful military campaigns and to awe foreign visitors.
Foundation of the site. There are several legends regarding the founding of Mycenae. The most popular story involves Perseus, the great hero and slayer of Medusa. After Perseus unintentionally killed his grandfather, he exchanged realms with his relative Megapenthes. When he arrived in his new lands, he dropped the cap of his sword scabbard, called Mysis in Greek. Interpreting the event as a good omen, Perseus decided to build a city. In another version of the story, Perseus picked up a mushroom, also called Mysis, and drank the water that flowed from it. With his thirst quenched, the hero decided that the land from which the mushroom grew was a suitable place to establish his new capital. Have to wonder what was in that mushroom water exactly? Oh well.
When these shafts were discovered by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in 1876, he believed the 6 gold-filled graves to be connected with the family of the great king Agamemnon, even going so far as to proclaim a gold mask he found within to be the death mask of Agamemnon. However, this was refuted by later excavations, which showed that the 19 bodies buried in the shafts dated back to a few hundred years before Agamemnon was even born. In fact, at the time of the body's burial, the Lion Gate and the citadel walls had not even been built yet. It's estimated that the people in the graves were members of the first Mycenaean dynasty. The graves later became a place of worship for Mycenaean kings, who raised walls to protect them. These walls helped preserve several incredible artifacts, including women's jewelry, death masks, and masterfully crafted weapons. By 1250 BCE, Mycenae was at the height of its power, and its living quarters and workshops were numerous. Houses were built everywhere, from the top of the palace's hill near the king's residence, to the slopes and terraces within the walls, to the nearby hills outside the citadel. At one point, the citadel's walls even had to be enlarged to make room for more quarters. The people who lived inside the citadel were those with high status in either the military, religious, or administrative sectors of the kingdom. This is reflected by the ceramic and metal vessels inside the houses, as well as their painted plastered walls.
Decline Mycenae. The exact causes of the decline of Mycenaean civilization remains a mystery to this day. Competing theories include a violent invasion by barbarous Dorians, catastrophic earthquakes, drought and famine, trade disruption, internal revolts, or a combination of two or more of the above. What is known for sure is that almost all important Mycenaean fortifications in mainland Greece were burned down between 1250 and 1180 BCE, just when Mycenaean civilization had reached its apex. The last clay tablets written in Pylos around 1180 BCE claim that a foreign attack was imminent, so it's easy to assume that violent events played a significant role in the civilization's decline. The fall of Mycenae was not immediate. Instead, it endured a slow, painful decline throughout the 12th and 11th centuries BCE until it was reduced to a rural community.
A traveler seeking an audience with the king would have first ascended a steep ramp from the Lion Gate to the citadel's summit. Here, they would have walked into the palatial complex through a grand entrance called the Propylon. Once inside, their gaze would immediately be drawn to the palace's main hall, a monumental area known as the Megaron. The vividly decorated Megaron, which glittered with precious objects and colorful frescoes in its heyday, was where the king would have received the traveler. If the king was feeling generous, he would have shared with the visitor the palace's most marvelous feature, its commanding and majestic view, which stretched from the plain of Argolis to the gleaming Aegean Sea. It was in this palace where a legendary Mycenaean king like Agamemnon would have held court. According to Homer and other poets, Agamemnon led the Greeks in the sack of Troy. Stories say that he was a fearsome warrior on par with Achilles, but also an overly ambitious and arrogant ruler. He sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to convince Artemis to grant his ship's passage to Troy. After conquering the city, he returned to Mycenae with mounds of riches, and a Trojan named Cassandra as his concubine. Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, was not pleased with her husband's sacrifice of their daughter. She plotted to murder her husband out of anger. The plot was successful, and, depending on the version of the story, Agamemnon was either murdered in his bath by Clytemnestra or killed by his cousin Aegisthus during a banquet.
I remember being in here, you know, in the game. Murdered quite a lot of people in here.
You've completed the tour. I trust it was an eye-opening experience. Though it did not last, Mycenae was a sort of precursor to what would eventually become the Greek civilization we know today. It's important we remember them, if only to avoid repeating their mistakes. Now, what else would you like to do? Then let's begin. First, I have quite a simple question. Which ancient city may have been the inspiration for Homer's depiction of Troy?
think it was...
Yes, the Mycenaeans' conflict with the city of Wilusa allegedly inspired Homer's Trojan War. Now, for the second question. Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to convince which god to allow him to proceed to Troy? Yes, Agamemnon sacrificed Iphigenia to reconcile with Artemis, who then allowed his ships to pass to Troy. Now, one last question. What was the name of Agamemnon's Trojan concubine? Correct. Following the sack of Troy, Agamemnon sailed home with the Trojan prophetess named Cassandra. You've studied the ruins well, traveler.
Oh, that Cassandra.
I appreciate your desire for more knowledge. Let us continue.
Welcome, friend, to this especially sacred part of the Olympian sanctuary. My name is Barnabas, and I am a ship captain. Don't be fooled by my scarred eye. Though I've seen my share of combat, I mostly stick to trading these days. Well, trading and introducing visitors like you to wonderful sights like this. This place is practically vibrating with divine energy. I feel like if I look over my shoulder right now, Zeus will be staring back at me. The sanctuary of Olympia was dedicated to Zeus, king of the gods. It had close connections to the divine, as you will see very soon. I'll come find you when you're done, and we can talk about what you've learned.
Ουχή, ήκουσα την ευθύτιαν ταύτην και το πρώτερον, μέληση την περιπτά.
This workshop was built for the renowned sculptor Phidias after his work on the Acropolis of Athens. In 435 BCE, Phidias came to Olympia to begin working on the great chryselephantine statue of Zeus. He died 5 years later, shortly after completing his masterpiece. This grand statue would become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Phidias's workshop was located right next to the Temple of Zeus. Its structure has been well preserved, mostly owing to its conversion to a church in the 5th century CE. Archaeologists have also discovered lots of ancient materials in the surrounding area, such as casting molds and sculpting tools. The most famous artifact, however, is a cup bearing an inscription that aggressively states, I belong to Phidias. On the fifth and final day of the Olympic Games, victors attended a ceremony where they were crowned with olive wreaths and showered in flowers. The crowns came from the sacred olive tree of Zeus, which was planted near the god's temple. A young boy trimmed the branches with a golden sickle before giving them to the Hellanodikai to turn into wreaths. After the crowning ceremony, it was time for great feasting and celebration.
Σπανιωτά την θεία αυτή η νικητού Ανδρεία.
Ήθε το κρατήσουμε.
Τι χαρακτήρες στις τραγωδίες προέρου.
The gymnasium. The main buildings where athletes trained were the gymnasium and the Lystra. In the gymnasium, athletes trained for races and pentathlon events. In the Palastria, they trained for wrestling and boxing. Wrestlers and boxers could train in the Chaos room, where a suspended leather bag full of sand, Korikos, served as sort of a punching bag. All athletes competed and trained nude. The reason for the introduction of athletic nudity is not immediately clear. The etymology of gymnasion pointed to nudity, as the Greek word gymnos means nude. According to Thucydides, this innovation came from Sparta. He says that Lacedaemonians were the first to practice sports naked. Tradition says that Acanthus of Sparta, who won the Dialis and the Lycus races in the Olympic Games of 720 BCE, would have been the first to do this. But Pausanias had another version of the story. He tells that the first to run naked in Olympia was Orhippus of Megaris in 720 BCE. He supposedly did this believing that nudity would make him help run faster. Not sure I want to see naked people running. Must be very flappy. Heroic cults. Ancient Greek heroes were viewed as intermediates between gods and men. Consequently, hero cults were a distinctive feature of Greek religion. Most heroes originated from heroic epics, such as Pelops in Olympia, but this quality was not always necessary. For example, Erechtheus of Athens had a local hero cult without ties to an epic. On some occasions, extraordinary humans, such as the founders of cities, could also become the objects of a cult, like Brasidas in Amphipolis. Hero shrines of Heroons were often constructed around the hero's real or suspected tombs. One exception among hero cults was the cult of Heracles. Heracles was considered as much as a god as hero, and his cult was widespread. There were many large sanctuaries dedicated to the demigod, such as the Heracleon in Thasos, where he was viewed as one of the city's protectors.
Pelops was both a legendary Greek hero and the mythical founder of the Olympic Games. According to legend, Pelops fell in love with the beautiful Hippodamia. Her father, Oenomaus, the king of Pisa, disapproved of their union. Having once heard a prophecy that he would be killed by his son-in-law, Oenomaus was known to challenge his daughter's suitors to chariot races, killing them when he won. Still, Pelops was determined to win Hippodamia's heart. Before the race, he enlisted the help of Poseidon, who gave him a golden chariot with 4 winged horses. Pelops was able to win both the race and the hand of his beloved, while Oenomaus was dragged to death by his horses. The start of this famous race was depicted on the eastern pediment of the Temple of Zeus.
Μεγαλώνυμε και πολιώνυμε, χθονία και θυροκτώνε
The Heraion was a temple dedicated to Hera. It is one of the oldest temples in the sanctuary, dating back to approximately 590 BCE. The structure included columns painted with images of women who won the Heraia, an athletic competition made up of running events. Every 4 years, 16 women were chosen to make a veil dedicated to Hera. These women also organized the competition, though they did not compete in it. The Heraia was unique for its focus on female athletes, in contrast to the male-exclusive Olympic Games. Hera was the goddess of women, marriage, family, and childbirth. She ruled Mount Olympus as Queen of the Gods, along with her husband and brother Zeus. Many mythological stories paint her as being annoyed at Zeus's many lovers and illegitimate offspring. In Greek art, Hera is usually depicted as matronly and regal, often wearing a crown or sitting on a throne. She is also sometimes seen holding a pomegranate, a symbol of both fertility and death. Hera's cult was very popular across Greece, and Olympia even minted her image on its coinage.
Μεγαλώνυμε Θεά, αγλαότιμε, τεχνών μύτη πολιώνυμε.
Ελθέ Θεά σώτηρα, άγουσα καλούς καρπούς από γέης.
Women victors. Although good grief. Although women were not allowed to compete in the Olympic Games, it was still possible for them to win the equestrian events. This is because horse and chariot races awarded not the jockeys or chariot drivers, but the owner of the horses. The first woman to participate in and win one of these races was the Spartan princess Kyniska. She won events both in 396 BCE and the following Olympiad, and her victories made her world famous. She even erected a statue of herself and her horses in Olympia. After her death, she was made a hero in Sparta, and a shrine was built in her honor. Following Kyniska, other women like Hierolenius of Sparta, Berenike, Queen of Egypt, Bilistiche of Macedonia and Timareta of Elis also went on to win equestrian events. I have to say, Zeus deserved something. Very large blood objects. Cult personnel. The cult personnel of Olympia was made up of priests who fulfilled different sacred purposes. The Koloi was responsible for the general organization of the cult and performed sacrifices every month. They burned incense mixed with grain, kneaded in honey on the site's different altars, and poured libations of wine. 2 soothsayers fulfilled the divining role previously held by Olympia's Oracle of Zeus, and 4 Spondiforoi worked as libation bearers. Meanwhile, exegetors were in charge of explaining Olympia's rituals to foreigners who came to the sanctuary to sacrifice. There were also a Magirius, who was something of a butcher and cook. The Magirius killed the animal being sacrificed, cut it, and cooked it so that it could be served at a later banquet. The very first Olympic winner, Koroibos of Elis, was a Magirius. Yeah. Zeus was an asshole. Legendary victors. Some athletes achieved a level of fame that bordered on mythical. The wrestler Milan of Croton. Millions of croutons? Nah, probably not. Milan of Croton was one of them. In 6th century BCE, he won events in every Pan-Hellenic game, granting him the rare privilege of the title of Periodonikes. He won 6 victories in Olympia, in addition to several other titles in the Pan-Hellenic games of Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmus. He was appointed general by his city and led an army during the war between Croton and Sybaris. In the battle that led to the destruction of Sybaris, Milan dressed like Heracles, wearing a lion skin and carrying a club. Milan's strength was legendary. He is reported to have carried his own bronze statue to its place in Olympia. However, he was not invincible. I'm invincible! You're loony. When he participated in his 7th Olympiad, he competed against a fellow from Croton in the final. Before combat started, the opponent bowed as a sign of respect, and then managed to defeat Milan. Even so, it's Milan's name that history remembers. Not him again.
Ήξερος, τι στα
One of the highlights of the Olympic Games was a ceremony that took place on the third day of the festival. It began with a procession of athletes, ambassadors, Hellenodikai, and animals. The group made their way around the Altis until they arrived at the Temple of Zeus. Then the animals were brought in front of the altar of Zeus and offered as a sacrifice. This sacrifice was known as a hecatome, a word that originally described the sacrifice of 100 oxen. During the hecatome, the bones and legs of the animals were burned and carried to the top of a mound of ashes from previous sacrifices. Meanwhile, the meat of the animals was saved for a large banquet held later in the evening.
Ίστα έχω ευποδία και η μη καλήφωνος. Ο πατήρ μου έλεγε δίνε δίνε εις θέατρο.
Ουχή, ήκουσα την ευχή.
Σχολεία. Ωραία σχολεία. Η ισορροπία του πνεύματος. Κοιτάς γυναίκας, μία παίχει σε πόροτα. Το αυτό και τις δούλεις.
Elis coinage and banner. Elis is most famous for its sanctuary of Olympia, where the Olympics were held. The main divinity of the sanctuary was Zeus. Its main temple was dedicated to him and housed the famous gold and ivory statue of Zeus made by Phidias. Zeus was known as the king of the gods and the god of thunder. One of his attributes was the thunderbolt, which was given to him by the Cyclops. The coinage of Elis is associated with Olympia, and Zeus is often depicted on the coins. They sometimes feature a head of Zeus, but he is commonly represented by his thunderbolt, which served as the model for the region's banner, or his signifying animal, the eagle.
Όστια των υποκριτών κλέπει την χάρη του έθνους. Κύκλωθεν των τραγωδών.
Orating contests. Though not part of the official competition, the first day of the Olympic festival featured recitals and teachings from poets and philosophers. Because Olympia was a public space, it provided these orators with an excellent opportunity to earn the ear of wealthy aristocrats, with the goal of turning them into future patrons. Oral tradition was so important in ancient Greece that some pan-Hellenic festivals, like the Pythian Games in Delhi, included orating contests as part of the official program.
Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας ένεκεν. Τραγωδία,
The Olympic Games were dedicated to Zeus, and all the ceremonies and events were hosted in his honor. It is no surprise that the largest temple in the sanctuary was the Temple of Zeus. While most temples were restricted to priests, the Temple of Zeus welcomed all who visited Olympia. This openness was most likely meant to show off the gold and ivory statue of Zeus that stood within the temple's walls. The building also featured art depicting both versions of the Olympic festival's founding myth. The eastern pediment showed a scene from the legendary race between Pelops and Oinomaos. The temple's metapiece, meanwhile, showed the 12 labors of Heracles, the other mythical founder of the games.
Very odd screen tearing just then. I'll have to look into the settings of it.
Zeus was the god of sky and thunder, and king of the Olympians. he ruled the world from his home on Mount Olympus. The child of Cronus the Titan, Zeus overthrew his father and cast the Titans out in a great battle known as the Titanomachy. He had children of his own with his wife Hera, including Ares, Hephaestus, Hebe, and Eileithyia. He also had many children without Hera, much to her consternation, but there are too many to list here. Zeus was believed to have control over the lives of mortals, as his many epithets attest to. For example, his title Horkios made him a keeper of oaths, while Xenios was the name conferred to him as a protector of hospitality. In Greek art, Zeus was usually depicted holding a thunderbolt and sitting on a throne, befitting his position as king. The Temple of Zeus was home to the chryselephantine statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The statue, made of gold, ivory, and wood, was sculpted by the renowned artist Phidias. At 13 meters tall, it was as impressive looking as it was difficult to maintain. Oil was used to protect the wood and ivory from cracking and to prevent general decay. While the statue does not exist today, it was thankfully described by Pausanias in great detail, so its legacy lives on.
Well, we can always just ask them to fight it out. Zeus versus Thor. I know one of them is going to be Thor in the morning. I stole that joke from the Sandman comic, by the way.
Hello again! I hope you enjoyed your visit and feel a little bit closer to the gods. Well, as close as a mortal can get. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Excellent! Let's see what you remember. Your first question is a simple one. Which goddess was Zeus's wife? Correct! Not only was Hera Zeus's wife, she was his sister as well. But let's move on to the next question. What kind of contest did Pelops win in his quest to marry Hippodamia? Yes, Pelops won a chariot race, thanks to Poseidon's help. And now, the final question. What was inscribed on the cup found near Phidias' workshop?
I like all of these. World's best dad, sculpture extraordinaire, keep calm and create one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, or I belong to Phidias. I'm just going to take option 4.
Phidias was very possessive of his things. Perhaps someone from the sanctuary kept stealing them. But I'm getting off track. Excellent work, friend! You honor the gods with your great wisdom. Farewell for now, my friend.
Let's see. I thought I'd just nip down there and see what that lyre is all about. Ah, okay. No. Not right now. Right. I'm afraid I have some hopping to do and all that, and more importantly, I need to feed my cat. Poor Owen's looking very hungry. He always looks hungry. So, I think I'll just end the stream here. So, thank you all for joining in. And yes, I shall go feed the cat as soon as we're done here. Poor starving thing. He's sitting on a shelf just above my desk and, well, he can keep an eye on me, so also make sure to yell at me when it's feeding time and we're getting there. So, thank you all for joining, and have a nice day.